In new statements from the US president, he claims that he will shortly impose deals with countries like Canada who have not yet reached an agreement. But meanwhile, leaked documents show that the Canadian government already has a deal laid out. But because of some of the parts of that deal, it may be extremely tough for Canadians to accept it. Meanwhile, the Bank of Canada has made a big issue clearer, an issue that would impact the daily lives of every Canadian, including their jobs and mortgages, while also impacting Canada's ability to even commit to a deal with the US in the first place. During a press conference at the Kennedy Center last night, Trump was asked about the status of trade deals, where he made the claim that he will soon impose deals on holdout nations like Canada. Listen to this.
We're rocking in terms of deals. Now, at a certain point, we're just going to send letters out, and I think you understand that, saying this is the deal. You can take it or you can leave it. You don't have to use it. You don't have to shop in the United States, as I said. So at a certain point, we'll do that. We're not quite ready. We're dealing with quite a few countries, and they all want to make a deal with us, every one of them. So we're going to be sending letters out in about a week and a half, 2 weeks, to countries, telling them what the deal is, like I did with EU.
But despite this claim that soon the US will be sending the Canadian government a letter telling them what the deal will be, it seems that a different piece of paper has been circulating in Ottawa, one that makes clear what they're willing to give up to come to some kind of deal here. The article that revealed this leaked document was written in French, so I've now put it into a Google Doc and translated it for the purposes of this video. The article claims that this leaked document originated in Ottawa, meaning that it's likely this is seemingly Canada's proposed solution of what they'd be willing to give up in order to remove the tariffs that Trump has imposed on Canada. In negotiations, any real deal might even go further than this. The article says the proposal notably includes Canada's participation in the Golden Dome, a missile defense shield project that is a priority for President Trump. This is something that they've talked about over the past couple of weeks. What this participation entails exactly is unknown, but Trump made statements recently that said that if Canada wants to be included in this Golden Dome missile defense, we're going to have to pay $61 billion US or 83 billion Canadian dollars. That's nearly 3% of Canada's GDP. The leaked document also includes the description of infrastructure investments to defend Arctic sovereignty. It mentions the increased defense spending that would allow Canada to reach NATO's target of 2% of GDP as early as this year. This is something that Carney has come out and announced at this point, and this seems like it will be a requirement inside of this deal, at least the one that's written by Canada, which seems to be Canada's preference. Because just this week, Mark Carney and the Canadian government pledged to spend $9 billion additional dollars this year in supporting NATO and supporting the Canadian military. Canadian Prime Minister said threats from a more dangerous and divided world are unraveling the rules-based international order, an order that was fused by the settlements at the end of the Second World War and the end of the Cold War, an order on which Canada has relied for longer than many of our lifetimes. Now, there are some concerns about how they'll finance this new spending, not to mention the potential 80 billion Canadian to spend on the Golden Dome project, and this is all connected to concerns that have been stated by the Bank of Canada. We'll get to that in just a second, but my personal thoughts, I think it's reasonable to spend on military, though I do think it's fair to take a skeptical look at big military spending. While it hasn't been a large topic in Canada due to our decreased military spending over the past decades, there is no shortage of critiques of the American military-industrial complex, which to a certain extent can incentivize the stoking of global tensions to justify increased military spending to benefit military corporations. But that's just something to consider. I certainly don't think that all military spending falls into that category. And Carney says that this spending will help Canada's industries, but there are some big concerns about where this money will ultimately flow, and warnings from the Bank of Canada about the government's ability to take on additional debt right now. It's a problem. We'll talk about that in a second, but first I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, and that's Incogni. You might not know this, but you've probably seen the negative impacts of it. Despite personal information laws, thousands of companies around the world are collecting and trading your personal data, even if you haven't consented to it. I mean, it's happened to me. I've signed up for various newsletters and seen an uptick in spam calls and emails from all kinds of unrelated senders. The good news? Well, you can request that data brokers delete the information they have about you. The bad news is it would take you ages to do all of this manually one by one. That's why I use Incogni. They'll reach out to these data traders on your behalf, saving you countless hours. And you can get 60% off Incogni's Unlimited and Family Unlimited plans by using the link in the description. I asked Incogni to remove me from these databases and just look at all of the places they've found and then removed my data from. And with Incogni's new custom removal feature, you can point to any website where you find your information is visible, and one of Incogni's privacy agents will take care of the rest for you. With everything we put online, I personally worry about someone I don't know finding out my address, my phone number, or even finding out personal information about my family members. But by using Incogni, I have the peace of mind that I'm doing everything I can to prevent that. So go to incogni.com/Russell and use the code Russell to get an exclusive offer of 60% off the unlimited plan, or include up to 4 additional members with the family unlimited plan. That's incogni.com/Russell and use code Russell, or click the link below to take your personal data off of the market. Despite talk of this $9 billion increase in spending into the Canadian military being positive for Canada's economy, there are reasonable concerns that much of this money will find its way to American contractors, especially when we take a look at exactly where this money is going. Now, we really only have these crude categories for now, but it shows where the money is going. It starts with $2.1 billion in recruitment and retention and support programs for Canada's armed forces, essentially giving raises and increasing the amount of funding to hire more personnel. And they say that they'll spend an additional $2.1 billion on research and development in Canada in our defense industry. It's reasonable to think that this $4.2 billion will mostly stay within Canada. But it is questionable how much these categories will go into the Canadian economy. $2 billion in military aid to Ukraine and to expand defense partnerships, as well as $1 billion in strategic military capabilities. This is stuff like missiles and drones and cyber warfare tools. Now, I'm currently not aware of Canadian contractors that really excel in these areas, but that could just be my ignorance. If there are, let me know in the comments and I'll take a closer look. When he was questioned on all of this spending, Mark Carney himself admitted that much of this spending will end up going to American defense contractors, but he thinks that that is reasonable.
First and foremost, we're doing this for us. Relatedly, we're doing it as a strong NATO partner. We're a firm believer in NATO, and we're standing shoulder to shoulder with our NATO allies. We'll continue to do so. And of course, the United States is a fundamental ally of the country.
Presumably, some amount of these monies will go towards U.S. Companies and defense contractors. Does that help in your negotiations with the U.S. at all?
Well, we are certainly in the top 20 clients, if I can put it that way, of the United States defense industry. And we are significantly increasing our defense spend. So it's material. We are material. And of course, there are many complementarities between our expertise, including the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces, but also technical expertise. A complementarity which will only increase with what we're announcing today. I'll give you an example. Canada is absolutely one of the world's leaders in cyber and AI.
So while he makes the case about our AI and cyber capabilities being strong and something that we can bring to this partnership, it does hint at a broader issue in Canada, the issue of not really being equipped to manufacture a lot of the critical tools and things we need. And we can point to the recent controversy around BC ferries to get right into this. BC Ferries just awarded a very large contract worth billions of dollars to a Chinese company, while there are Canadian alternatives to build their ferries. When questioned about why he would choose the Chinese state-owned shipbuilder instead of a Canadian one, he makes a reasonable point and says what we are not going to do is ask our customers to pay more than they need to because we're picking a local company. That's reasonable to a certain extent, but at the same time, amidst all of the talk about supporting and buying Canadian, becoming less dependent on other nations was a priority, and this raises concerns about whether or not this is really enough to grow Canadian industries. Will we choose to buy Canadian in a big way when it comes to building critical infrastructure? Unsurprisingly, the union that represents shipbuilders in BC was pretty pissed off. A representative from the union said, "We listened to the Prime Minister say, 'Build, baby, build,' but we actually haven't seen the fruits of that in this decision." He says that this is a generational impact in shipbuilding, describing the potential impact of the 4 new major vessels. We're probably looking at $1 billion of ship investment here. And in the context of this video, largely about developing military abilities and national security, you've got to look at the national security concerns that surround outsourcing more and more manufacturing, relying on allies and even nations we have troubled relationships with in order to supply us with the things we need. But that could be a full video in and of itself. The main point being, isn't it a national security concern that we can't build the things we need here in Canada? But as we ramp up military spending and consider the possibility of contributing major money to the development of this Golden Dome missile defense system, well, the overwhelming question becomes, how will we be able to finance that kind of spending? Well, there's really only one way to do so. The Canadian government isn't seeing a dramatic increase in tax revenue, and despite the Prime Minister's promising statements about reducing bloat in the government and finding ways to save, it's not likely that they're going to be able to eliminate tens of billions of dollars of spending. So the answer, as it always seems to be, is to take on more debt as a nation. And hey, I'm not even here to tell you that in every situation this is necessarily a bad thing. There are fair arguments, though not without drawbacks, that make the case that taking on debt to achieve targeted goals, well, it can sometimes make sense. If the investment you're making with borrowed money today is more valuable than the penalty of the interest on that debt, well, in some cases it can work out. But there is a big problem when it comes to any kind of major expansion in Canadian debt. A worst-case scenario that the Bank of Canada has been warning about for the past year or so. I've made videos on this in the past and I'll try to link it above in a card, but here's an extremely brief summary. When the government takes on debt, it issues bonds, which are like IOUs. Investors give them money and then the government has to pay that money back after a set amount of time with interest. But due to the direction of interest rates over the past 2 years, many hedge funds around the world have taken advantage of an opportunity that allowed them to make a small but nearly guaranteed profit by buying Canadian government debt and derivatives of that debt. Now, since the profits are so small, to make this strategy worthwhile, they've increased volume. In other words, these hedge funds have themselves used extraordinary amounts of debt in order to buy up way more government bonds than they'd otherwise be able to, leading to these hedge funds making up a larger and larger share of the Canadian bond market. In other words, these hedge funds hold larger and larger shares of the Canadian national debt. The big risk is that if all of a sudden this trade, which is called the basis trade, by the way, if all of a sudden it stops being profitable, well, we could see these hedge funds selling off the bonds, potentially being forced to, as their leverage, their debt, makes any price downturn all the more impactful. Here's the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, Carolyn Rogers, saying clear as day that this has the potential to be a big problem. It was included in the Financial Stability Report, and it was also talked about in this press conference. Listen to this.
The increased activity by hedge funds has helped absorb increased issuance of government debt, keeping yields lower and liquidity higher. But hedge funds have also taken on increasingly large amounts of leverage to fund their purchase of government bonds. And this makes them more likely to pull back from these crucial markets in periods of stress, introducing added volatility. If the trade war causes a larger spike in volatility than we've seen so far, leveraged hedge funds might rush to sell their holdings. That could strain liquidity across core markets, increasing stress throughout the financial system.
In short, if it weren't for hedge funds, Canada would have a harder time raising money right now, and would likely have to do so at a more and more punitive interest rate, which then would flow out into the economy, impacting things like mortgages and other consumer debt, as well as businesses that may be looking for cheaper debt to expand. Now, if the hedge funds unwind this debt-fueled trade all at once, Canada may have serious trouble as they look for new buyers to take on new increased debt that could be connected to the spending we've talked about throughout this entire video. Because the increased spending on the $9 billion, which has already been announced, which in some ways seems reasonable, paired with the possibility of financing a portion of the Golden Dome missile defense system to the tune of 80 billion Canadian, not to mention the new nation-building projects that the Liberal government has positioned as one of their primary policy objectives, All of this takes a lot of money. Not to say that they're bad ideas or good ideas, but it takes a lot of money. And it could come at a time when we're not actually able to take on more debt, at least at acceptable interest rates. It's a really interesting situation, and I'm curious what you think about it. What do you think of this proposed deal that seems to be coming from the Canadian government? Do you think that the US will accept it, or will there be more concessions that will have to be made to remove these tariffs? What do you think about all this? Have I gotten stuff wrong? Let me know in the comments. And while you're down there, you can check out the new channel membership. The link is in the description. It includes things like bonus content, members chat that I'm directly in, as well as monthly member Zoom calls that I host. So if you're interested in supporting the channel further than just subscribing and watching, you can do so there. But with all of that said, thanks so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time.